premiere date for episode 127 is October 25th, and back in 1964, on the 25th of October, something happened during a play on the Pro Football Gridiron that has gone down in infamy. Even people with just a general interest in football heard of it or know of it, because the play epitomized life and the imperfections of human beings even more than it epitomized football in competitive sport. This was a play where we all could relate to its, I guess the most appropriate label would be victim. The individual singled out on October 25th, 1964 was Jim Marshall of the Minnesota Vikings, and his mistake was recovering a fumble by the opponent 49ers and running the wrong way into the wrong end zone. Marshall thought he scored a touchdown for the Vikings in the defense, but in reality, he scored a safety for the wrong team. Now, the 49ers ran a pass play and completed it. That started the sequence of events. And the receiver was tackled and was stripped of the ball before hitting the ground, which resulted in a fumble. The receiver, interestingly, to constant listener pro football aficionados out there, was Billy Kilmer, who ended up being a quarterback later in his career with Washington. Anyway, Marshall scoops up the fumble, and he ran 66 yards the wrong way into his team's own end zone. And after completing a run, he thought he had scored a touchdown for the Vikings. He tosses the ball sort of in a celebration toward the stands, and that results, of course, in a safety for the 49ers. Didn't take but a few seconds before Marshall realized his gaffe. And according to Marshall, when he approached Vikings head coach at the time, Norm Van Brocklin told him right after that play, "Jim, you did the most interesting thing in this game today." That's an understatement. Van Brocklin, by the way, is a Hall of Fame legend. Now, in the game, Marshall actually ended up redeeming himself, and you don't hear enough about this in the lore of that event. The Vikings won the game, so Marshall's mistake didn't cost them the game itself, and that 27-22 victory for Minnesota was in large part due to a forced fumble by Marshall, which Carl Eller returned for a touchdown. Now, Eller, he ran in the right direction. And by the way, Carl Eller, like Van Brocklin, is also a Hall of Famer. So despite the Vikings winning and Marshall delivering a key play to contribute to the win, people never ended up forgetting about the miscue. That's what they focused on. And here's a cool side note about that now famous gaffe. Marshall later, after that event in the game, he received a letter from a gentleman by the name of Roy Riegels. Now, Roy Riegels was infamous for a wrong way run of his own in the 1929 Rose Bowl. And the note that Roy sent to Jim Marshall said, "Welcome to the club." So Marshall running the wrong way, it's one of the two most famous screw-up plays in the history of the NFL, the other one being Garo Yepremian and his blocked field goal train wreck from Super Bowl 7, which is another all-time classic gaffe. And then one final note before we leave Jim Marshall. I have him, in my opinion, as the best player who is not in Canton, Ohio, that has a bronze bust there. So he's the best player not to be in the Hall of Fame. Or maybe another way of saying that, if you had one more player from that era, it would be him. He should be in the Hall of Fame. Key piece of the famed Purple People Eaters defense, which I ranked as the 5th greatest defense of the Super Bowl era. And you can peruse the entire top 10 list on nickdeulius.com under the commentary tab and under the sports category. And Marshall, he also held the all-time consecutive games started record for years until Brett Favre unseated him. And Marshall still sits second on that all-time list for consecutive starts in NFL history. So get Jim Marshall in the Hall of Fame as soon as possible and celebrate his one moment of not thinking as part of that journey of professional greatness. Screw-ups are going to happen, and the trick is to learn from them, adjust, and then keep achieving.